really don't like to acknowledge that on the left. And that's when Al Green got up there and started harassing Trump. This was debated, interestingly, the other day when Stephen A. Smith went on The View. And Joy Behar, she too pushed back. And even on this morning's The Daily, Maggie Haberman was pushing back on just how historic the victory. They really don't want to say historic. They don't want to say mandate. They don't want to say any of the things that Trump says. And they
supporter of Trump. I'm a supporter of truth and the facts. And here's the facts. The man won every swing state. He increased in terms of his voter turnout in his favor from the standpoint of blacks, Latinos, and young voters. He increased his numbers in that regard from 2020. 89% of the counties shifted to the right.
The show began like any other morning on The View, with the hosts sipping their coffee, tossing out quick remarks, and cycling through their usual talking points. The mood was calm, the smiles were rehearsed, and everything seemed to be unfolding exactly as planned. But then Stephen A. Smith stepped onto the stage, and the entire atmosphere flipped in seconds. The hosts weren't prepared for someone who wouldn't nod politely like a puppet. Whoopi Goldberg leaned forward, expecting another easy, controlled discussion, but that's not what she got. Stephen A. Smith wasn't there to play along. He was there to speak truths no one else on that stage wanted to acknowledge. "Look," he began, calm but firm, "Democrats have a black man problem and everybody knows it." The words struck like a lightning bolt, and Whoopi's expression froze on live television. But Smith wasn't finished. He laid it out plainly. As a black man in America, Democrats had nothing real to offer. Nothing at all. The silence that followed was deafening. The panel shifted uncomfortably in their seats, as if each one knew he had just said what no one dared to say before.
Comfortable all those women in the panel were by literally sitting next to a black man that's not just gonna nod on like a bobblehead and go along with all their Democrat talking points. So look, the Democrats have a black male problem, right? Everybody knows that. And Stephen A. Smith has been very savvy in kind of like coming from the sports commentator world. He's extremely successful, and then kind of putting himself into the space where I'm gonna say I am not for Trump, but I am going to sit here and I'm going to tell you the truth about everything that is going on right now. It's very savvy. Because, and this is where I'll throw the black card down on the table. If you are a black man, Democrats have absolutely nothing to offer.
Whoopi tried to jump in with a defense, but Stephen cut straight through the noise. "I'm not a supporter of Trump. I'm a supporter of truth," he declared with force, and that's when the audience erupted in applause. He pulled out the very numbers the media tried to bury, showing that Trump hadn't just held his ground. He had actually grown his support among black voters, Latino voters, and young voters. And then came the real shocker. Nearly 90% of counties had shifted to the right. The hosts scrambled desperately, trying to frame the win as smaller than it was. They tossed around percentages, questioned mandates, and tried to downplay the shift. But Stephen stayed cool, knocking down each argument one by one like dominoes. "It is a mandate," he explained firmly. Because this wasn't just about Trump. It was a rejection of the Democratic Party and what they stopped delivering to the people. The crowd gasped, and Whoopi's smile vanished completely. He broke it down even further, pointing out that Biden had entered office calling himself a transitional president, a stopgap. But where was the transition? None at all. The midterms had revealed the cracks, and this latest landslide made it undeniable. Whoopi tried to push back with her trademark sharpness, questioning how historic it truly was, but Stephen didn't blink. He repeated steady as stone. "This wasn't luck, this was history. And refusing to admit it is the real problem." He exposed how the Democratic Party had drifted away from its roots, the working class, the everyday people who once trusted them. Instead, he warned, they've been chasing applause on social media instead of delivering real results. The words cut like a knife. And by now, Whoopi looked rattled, shifting uneasily in her seat.
Thoughts on the election as it just went down?
I was surprised at how lopsided it was. I was not surprised by the outcome. I saw the outcome coming from a mile away. You have to take into account, listen, we respect our president, Joe Biden, but here's the reality. He got into office. He promised to be a transitional president, to be a stopgap to pave the way for somebody else to come on board. Into the midterms, it was supposed to be a red wave. It did not happen.
Trump's only been in office for 6 weeks. Seems like 6 years, doesn't it? And he's been going around with his cronies touting his so-called landslide and blowout win. But he won the popular vote by 1.5%, one of the smallest ever, and he won the general election by less than 50%. So what kind of mandate is this really?
Well, it is a mandate, and I'm going to explain why.
She wasn't in control of the conversation anymore, and the audience could feel it. Stephen A. Smith had flipped the entire dynamic of the show, and then came the moment that made jaws drop. He looked directly at Whoopi and declared, "If you are a black man, Democrats have absolutely nothing to offer you." The air was sucked straight out of the studio, and for a beat, no one dared to make a sound. This wasn't just a flashy soundbite. It was a full-blown reality check. He spoke about black households led by strong women, about Latino men choosing Trump because of economic survival, about communities voting not for identity but for their livelihoods. Each word hit like a punch, leaving no room for denial. One host tried to soften the blow, bringing up Trump's ties to sports as if that could shift the subject. But Stephen turned it around with razor-sharp precision. He reminded them he had been visible in those arenas, present in those communities, long before politics ever came into play. And people noticed. The audience clapped in agreement. Then he drove the knife even deeper, declaring that Trump's victory wasn't just about him. It was an indictment of the Democratic Party itself. Even after impeachments and felony convictions, people still voted for him. That wasn't blind loyalty, he said. It was pure rejection of the other side. Whoopi tried once again to pivot away, but Stephen wasn't letting her escape. People are tired of speeches, tired of promises, tired of being ignored, he said firmly. And with every word, he looked more like the true voice of the people than anyone else on that panel. By the time he finished, the room wasn't just tense. It was cracked wide open. Whoopi had been stopped in her tracks, silenced by a truth she couldn't brush aside with her usual comebacks. Stephen leaned back in his chair, calm and unbothered, as the gasps echoed across the room.
Press things later on. That's always been his MO, and that's what we've seen.
Yeah, well, I want to go back to what you said about black men being very comfortable with matriarchy, and I agree with that because, you know, black households are often led by a grandmother, black grandmother or black mother. However, 55% of Latino men voted for Trump. Why do you think that happened?
Well, I think that economically, they were looking at things. First of all, you've got, in this country, you've got Cubans, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Guatemalans, Venezuelans, Colombians, et cetera, et cetera. And if you talk to the Hispanic community, depending on who you're talking to, they think differently. The Cubans think differently than the Dominicans. The Dominicans think different than Colombians. To some, that
Whoopi tried to steady herself and regain control, but the damage was already done. The audience wasn't looking at her anymore. Their attention was locked fully on Stephen A. Smith. He reminded everyone that Trump didn't just scrape by. He surged in groups the Democrats thought they owned. That's not random. That's deliberate, he said firmly, and you could feel the audience nodding in agreement. The hosts scrambled again, pointing out that Trump had only won the popular vote by a slim margin, but Stephen wasn't fooled. It's not just about percentages, it's about momentum, he shot back with power, and the panel had no answer. Whoopi tried to rally the conversation, but Stephen cut her off with precision. This isn't about Trump's character, it's about people's survival, he declared, and the audience roared with applause. Whoopi looked stunned, gripping her notes with trembling hands. Stephen pressed further, explaining that working people, especially Black and Latino communities, aren't voting based on speeches or slogans. They're voting for jobs, for money, for safety. They're voting for their lives, not your hashtags, he blasted, and the studio shook with cheers. The panel froze, unable to respond. Their usual talking points collapsing in real time as Stephen rewrote the script live on television. Then he struck again, diving into the Democrats' biggest blind spot, the economy. Black men, Latino men, everyday workers, they weren't seeing results from the party that claimed to represent them. They don't see it because it isn't there, he said with fire, and the truth hit like a thunderclap. One co-host nervously tried to shift focus, asking about Latino voters, but Stephen was ready. Cubans think differently than Mexicans, Dominicans think differently than Colombians. They are not a monolith, and pretending they are is insulting, he shot back, leaving the panel in stunned silence.
Said you were, way back in 2016, before Trump ran for president, you were friendly with him because he's really into sports. And you said that the fact that he's a sports guy, which I didn't realize, because I don't think of sports when I look at him, but I'm not even being snarky. I just don't think of a sports
What
guy.
about riding around a golf cart? Doesn't that count?
Right. But you, on the other hand, I get, you said that being a sports guy helped him.
Well,
what did you mean by that?
Because what happened is that a lot of African Americans, Latinos, and others, we associated ourselves with him because he would host fights at Trump casinos. He would show up at basketball games.
The crowd gasped as Stephen exposed a truth most politicians never dare to say. Democrats treat minority groups as one giant block instead of listening to their real concerns. The silence on stage spoke volumes. Whoopi leaned forward, desperate to wrestle the topic back under control, but Stephen wasn't budging. He told them point blank, this isn't about personalities, it's about policies, results, and who's actually delivering them. His voice thundered with conviction, and then came the line that shook the entire studio. Minority voters didn't betray Democrats. They just stopped letting the media speak for them. The audience erupted in applause, drowning out every attempt by Whoopi to respond. The camera cut to her face, and for the first time in years, she looked rattled on her own stage. Her trademark confidence was gone, replaced by visible frustration. Stephen leaned in with laser focus, hammering the point further. People are tired of being told what to think. They want action, not theater. His words weren't just commentary. They were a direct challenge to the entire political machine. One host tried to redirect the fire back onto Trump, whispering about his flaws. But Stephen brushed it aside with ease. Nobody's saying he's perfect. They're saying he was the only one willing to fight for them. The crowd clapped again, louder than before, as the tension in the room reached a boiling point. Whoopi tried to crack a joke to lighten the mood, but nothing worked. Stephen's presence was overwhelming, and the audience was hooked on every single word. Then, he shifted gears with a bombshell no one expected. He looked right at Whoopi and declared, "The Democratic Party used to be the party of the working class, but not anymore."
What does that say about the Republican Party?
It's not about what it says about the Republican Party. It's about what it says about the Democratic Party.
Why?
Because in the end, if you think about him being impeached twice, 34 felony counts or 34 felony convictions, and they still elected him president, it's not about him winning. It was an indictment against the Democratic Party and what the Democratic Party was offering to American citizens. We might sit up there and talk about, hey, you should be a party for the working class, which the Democratic Party was once known for. They're not known for that right now. Why? Because their message was catering towards others and towards other issues, and they forgot about the people that brought them there, that elevated the Democratic Party to what it was over these last few.
The words landed like dynamite, shaking the entire studio. Stephen explained how the Democratic Party had abandoned the very people who built it, chasing applause from elites instead of fighting for real Americans. The audience erupted in cheers while Whoopi scrambled for a comeback, but Stephen didn't give her the chance. He pressed harder. That's why voters flipped. They're not obsessed with labels. They're obsessed with survival. The audience roared again, and the panel was left speechless, their expressions frozen as if they had just been struck by lightning. Every point Stephen made was like a hammer pounding the same truth, the truth the media refused to admit. And every time Whoopi tried to jump in, he shut her down without ever raising his voice. The cameras captured it perfectly. Whoopi Goldberg stopped in her tracks, unable to take back control from a guest who simply refused to play along. Stephen wasn't slowing down. In fact, he was only getting warmed up. He turned to the panel and declared, "This wasn't just a Republican victory, it was a wake-up call." The studio erupted once more, while the host sat frozen, unable to counter him. Then he dropped another bombshell. Nearly 90% of counties in America turned red. That's not an accident, that's a landslide. The audience gasped as the panel looked like they had been punched in the gut. Whoopi tried desperately to push back, saying the popular vote margin was too slim to matter, but Stephen didn't flinch. A slim margin in the popular vote doesn't erase the fact that people flipped everywhere. That's the definition of a mandate. His words sliced through the noise like a blade. The tension was unbearable. Whoopi's face hardened, her eyes narrowing. But Stephen stood immovable. He wasn't just speaking. He was dismantling years of spin in real time, right in front of a live audience.
Stern says that he wasn't confident that the country was ready to elect the first female president because he knows, quote, how men talk behind closed doors about us. So we're very privileged to have a great guy here today.
Yeah.
Tell her, what do men say about us behind closed doors?
Well, first of all,
Say it to
Do
our
tell.
faces.
Yeah. Do tell.
I don't hide, so no worries there. Here's the deal. I respectfully disagree with Howard Stern, only from the standpoint that I wish he had been more specific. Why don't you say white men? Because let me tell you something about black men. I must confess, I wish I could debate some of these guys. I'd love to be on a debate stage going up against these guys with
Don't
the
say that,
presidency on
because
the
you know
line.
we will arrange that.
I'm half joking, but I kind of mean it. I mean, I have no desire to be a congressional figure or a senator, but if you came to me and you told me I had a legitimate shot to win the presidency of the United States of America, I would definitely consider it. But here's the problem.
So you want to break through the line?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Then, Stephen shifted the spotlight onto culture, calling out Howard Stern's remarks about America not being ready for a female president. Why don't you say white men? Stephen shot back boldly. Because black men don't talk like that about women. The room went silent as Whoopi's eyes widened in shock. The audience gasped again. This wasn't supposed to happen on The View. Stephen had just thrown a cultural grenade onto the table, and no one was ready for it. He followed it with something even more explosive. If you're a black man in America right now, you're realizing Democrats don't speak for you. They expect you to fall in line. The truth hit like a hammer, and the panel had no response. Whoopi tried desperately to change the subject, but Stephen locked eyes with her and refused to let her slip away. People are walking away because they're tired of being ignored, he declared, as the crowd roared louder than ever before. Then came the line that stunned the studio. Even with impeachment, even with convictions, people still voted for Trump. That wasn't about him. It was about rejecting the Democrats. The shock on the hosts' faces was unmistakable, while the audience clapped, cheered, and even rose to their feet in parts of the studio. Stephen A. Smith wasn't just talking. He was commanding the entire stage. He leaned in, calm but razor sharp. The truth is simple. Americans don't want excuses anymore, they want results. The crowd thundered in approval, while Whoopi looked down at her notes, silenced and defeated. The panel tried one last time to wrestle control of the conversation, but Stephen wasn't giving an inch. He was in complete command, and everyone in the room knew it.
The virtue of Stephen A. Okay, and I don't mean to canonize this guy. And I'm afraid, because I know what happens when somebody's getting elevated, there's now a price on you to bring you down, and I don't want to see that for him. So that's why I'm shy on this. But he is also a reminder that reasonable should be a commodity. It should be a commodity. The fact that, you got to be full-on MAGA or you got to want to kill Trump.
Yeah, about politics. And you said that you were not shocked that Trump won, but you were stunned that it was a landslide. Why do you think most people didn't see it coming?
Because the pollsters told us, and we believed them, that it was going to be a tight race. They were in panic mode. And the reason why so many people were in panic mode was because the tighter the race, the more chaos presumably would ensue, because he would automatically say it was rigged. He would challenge the outcome of the election. We all knew this. And as a result, folks were fearful that it was going to be a replica of 2020.
You can spin headlines, you can shape narratives, but the people have already spoken, Stephen declared with force, raising his hand slightly as the room fell into silence. This isn't about being pro-Trump. It's about being pro-truth, he said, steady and calm. And the entire studio leaned in to listen. He continued, explaining how the media thrives on dividing people into two extremes. But it's the reasonable voices that scare them the most, because reasonable voices expose the lies. The crowd exploded in cheers while Whoopi shook her head, unable to form a response. One by one, the co-hosts lowered their eyes, realizing this wasn't just another guest appearance. It was a complete takeover. Stephen then turned straight to the camera, speaking beyond the panel and directly to the millions watching at home. Stop letting people tell you what to think. Start looking at the truth for yourself, he demanded, as the audience leapt to their feet in thunderous applause. Whoopi leaned back in her chair, defeated and drained. She hadn't landed a single punch. For the first time, she wasn't the strongest voice in the room. Stephen A. Smith was. The segment didn't end with laughter or playful banter. It ended with stunned silence, broken only by the roar of the crowd. Stephen A. Smith had done the unthinkable. He stopped Whoopi Goldberg in her tracks on live television, leaving the panel with nothing but silence and shock. What began as an ordinary morning episode ended as one of the most unforgettable moments in the history of The View.